Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Just want to say thank you to everybody for joining today, especially those in the snowy Northeast who are having a bit of a storm here today. Just want to say, again, thank you. And today is the first of an ongoing series that we're starting within our Out of Home office hours. So if you've been joining right along, you know we do our training sessions, but this is our first of our series of what we're calling our data talks. And what these are going to be are a series of talks all around data. We know that data could be a confusing area, and it's a very broad topic. And we want to make sure our members understand the various aspects of data in terms of the different types, the different sources that are out there. We want to make sure that our members can understand the benefits and limitations of each type. And we think you'll find over the course of the series that there really is no silver bullet. And I think even starting today, you'll start to recognize that and hear that as well. And so, as you probably guessed from when signing up, the goal of the title of today's topic is the value of demographic behavior and demographic, behavioral, and opinion data for full-scale audience measurement. And that's what we really want to focus on, this idea of how are we using data to measure and really understand audiences. And we're honored and excited and happy today to have a number of people with us. So first is Andrew Feigenson. He is the CEO of Simmons Insights. And we're excited to have him here. And he's going to walk through a use case, but also talk about some of what he is seeing in terms of the trends in data collection and the different aspects of it, and just really like how to understand the limitations and benefits of each type. And Dylan Maven, whom many of you should know and do know, I'm sure, from GeoPath, is here as well. And he's going to be talking about how all this ties back into the GeoPath Insight Suite and how we're leveraging various aspects of these types of data. And then also joining from Simmons are Ishan Bumik, as well as Ashley Brown, who will kind of give some context to Simmons overall, as well as do a demonstration of their Simmons' platform, which is really interesting and exciting as well. Just to go through kind of the overall goals of what we hope our members take from today's session is really providing a deeper understanding of probability sample and survey data. And I know Andrew's going to talk more specifically about those terms and really give some context to them, but how that ties into, as I said earlier, full-scale audience measurement. And then Dylan, like I said, will come in and talk about how this type of behavioral data is being leveraged in the Insight Suite. And then again, we also want to make sure our members have an overview of just who Simmons Insights is and some of the data that they offer. And just a little bit of an aside, if any of you have reached out to us through the Geek Out at geopath.org helpline and asked for support with data or anything like that, or even leverage some of the data in our Geek Out library, you'd probably come in contact with Simmons data, because Simmons is a partner of ours, and that's one of the areas where you may have used or experienced data. One thing before I do hand it off to Andrew is that I want to make sure everybody is aware of the questions widget. And if you do have questions, please reach out to us and ask questions. We'll do our best to try to get to everybody's questions, but we'll probably hold off till the end. I know a lot of times on our sessions we answer them in real time, but we'll have a Q&A at the end of this session today. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Andrew and have fun and enjoy today.
Thank you, Scott. And I'm sure that there's no much more fun talking about data. So I think we're going to have a good time with this. A little bit of a background. So Simmons, for about 6 decades, has been what I call the essential source for consumer information in America. In other words, if somebody wanted to understand the longitudinal trends of how customers' behaviors are changing over time, they went to Simmons. Now, I've been on board here for just over 1.25 years. And, historically, when we looked at that job of being the essential consumer insights source, a lot of that was done through a survey panel that we ran. And over the course of the last year and a quarter, what we recognize is that survey panels, particularly ones, and I'll get back to this, that are called probability samples, are really powerful for certain things, but they don't solve everything. In fact, there's a lot of data out there today, which is a lot deeper, which is a lot more scalable, which I call big data, which is from which you can get a lot of insights and actionability and speed that you don't get out of the type of data that companies like Simmons have run for a long time. However, the two of those things coming together end up being a really interesting combination. And here's why. I wanted to focus first on the concept of probability sample. Companies like Simmons or MRI or Nielsen and ComScore, these kind of companies that come out of this research heritage where it was really important to understand markets from a very representative manner. In other words, if you were to survey everybody in New York on their ride-share habits, you might get 10 million people, but their ride-sharing behaviors will be radically different than if you got 10 million people or even 500 people that were scattered randomly across the United States. So in other words, this concept of representativeness, or what we call probability sample, selecting audiences to really reflect the overall market becomes really important. And so when I look at what Simmons has today, it's probability sample, it's survey data, and what we'll talk about is how that comes together with large-scale audience data to create a rounded view of a consumer. And I'm going to start, if you could flip one forward, Scott, with something that describes data better than anything else, which are cute little pets. Because if you want people to love data, why not start with a cute puppy like the one you're seeing here? But there's actually a story to this. And Scott, if you go one forward, I'll explain. There was an article that was published in the Washington Post recently, and it was, we took the photo from that, and the question was, it said data sources disagree. And they looked at the percentage of households that own a pet, a dog, or a cat. I didn't include the latter in here for the sake of space. And they basically said, how can it be that all these different surveys disagree? And I'll get to the reason surveys tied to big data by way of this story. So the American Pet Products Association estimated that 68% of the population have pets and 48% have dogs, one or more dogs. And if you look at the other sources they looked at, the American Veterinary Medical Association, 57 and 38, Simmons at 53 and 38, and the census at 49, clearly there's a radical difference. And for companies that are trying to figure out how to get a market share, what local markets to go in and things like that, that kind of discrepancy between a 68% and a 49% ownership is immense. And it leads to bad decisions if the data is not right. So the question is, if all of this data is saying different things, how do we get to a right answer? And the way we look at this is through that probability sample. So if you go one forward, Scott, I used an example here for people that really want to understand market size. And if you look in the left in red, you'll see where that APPA study was done at the 68% for pet ownership and 48% for dog ownership. Running our data, what's really interesting is if I take those same statistics and I run it against people who are mobile coupon users or heavy internet users, it looks really similar. Well, why is that important? It's important because, and I'll know this may not be the only reason, when you look at the places we draw survey sample from as a larger industry today, they tend to be very heavily digital. They tend to be characterized by heavy internet users. And in a lot of cases, they're done by going through couponing sites or providing coupons to people. So it's not surprising that if you were to run the same question on that kind of sample, you would get an understanding of the world that looked a lot like those people. So clearly, the world is not like those people. And if you look at what we had, which is the second red, and you match that up to the general population, the census, those numbers actually look a lot more similar because of the way we balance things. Now, I'm going to take this even one step further, and I'm using a specific example for this in pets, but you'll understand why. If I look at African Americans in general, pet ownership's a lot lower, right? But if I split them, and we took the example of Essence, which is an African American focused magazine, and if you look at the physical subscribers and the mobile web subscribers, they're radically different even there. The magazine subscribers run a 17% pet ownership, while the mobile subscribers are up at a 47%. So even if you take one population and one media property, you can get radically different results. So why is this important? Not only for understanding a market, but let's say you're trying to plan, right? You're planning media buys. Well, I can't look at one population and look at them in abstract. I have to understand how their behavioral habits make differences in what they do in other areas. I also need to, if I'm running things like ROI or return on ad spend metrics, and I take, where we tend to focus a lot very heavily on digital channels right now. Now, I can't necessarily take the results coming off of the digital channels and assume they're going to be the same elsewhere because those other populations seeing ads may respond very differently. So we talk about this as understanding those calibration factors. If you go one step further, this is a bit of a geeky slide, but I love it. I'll explain it for a second. We did an analysis. Our approach to this is we look at taking surveys. Let's say it can be anything. You can take big data as well, but I'll start with an online survey example because that's what we're looking at. When we run online surveys, we'll start with this thing we call an unweighted sample, which is just the pure responses we get back in from digital surveys. We'll take that and we'll look at the responses and weight that against demos, because that has some impact on the way actual populations look. And then we'll take that one step further and we'll look at calibrating it by those digital use factors, those internet factors, similar to what I showed with the coupons and the heavy internet. And then we'll go one step further, where we'll go and take that, what we call non-probability sample, the digital sample. We'll compare it against that carefully curated, balanced probability sample. We'll understand where the deviations come. And based on that, we can figure out whether there are additional calibration factors that need to happen. We've done that by applying machine learning against the two different data sets. And ultimately, we put a final number out there. So this example you're looking at is we took a variety of areas, use of search engines, use of facial cleansers, sit-down family restaurants, and paying bills online. I don't know why we picked those four together, but they're clearly kind of different. And we started out by looking, if we looked at unweighted, how many of those of the data points we saw were within 5 or 10 point deviations from that probability sample. Then we demo weighted it, did it, demos and internet, and in each step you'll see that the amount of discrepancy comes down. Then the final step, weighting and calibration. And after we did all that, we were within less than 4% were 5 deviations, and far less than 1% were 10 deviations. And when we fused in our additional data points, things looked really, really similar. So in other words, this is an approach for taking this probability sample and using it against what I call biased data sources. This is for digital sample, but we also do things like this for larger scale behavioral data sets. Let me go forward with a second case. So how do you bring smaller kind of curated data together with larger data sets? We tend to be used as a truth set in a lot of cases. And, I think there's a lot of argument of whether you could, what's better, self-declared or observed data. What I know is that that being as curated as we are, we can identify things that are particular anomalies, since it is an easier to manage data point, and then serve as essentially a truth set for a lot of people. So in this case, we took a large-scale deterministic data set that has a lot of information on the U.S. population. We matched that against us, and we said, how good or bad do we think, the data that this company had was? And I will say, for the most part, it was pretty good. But there were interesting things. If I look at pets in the household and dogs in the house, this company crushed it. They matched 30 to 31% of our panelists, which means that, you know, they're probably getting data from, I'm guessing, a pretty good transaction source, right? They projected, you know, 73% pet ownership against our samples. Every time they saw our sample and they said yes or no on pet ownership, they were 73% correct. Every time they said, and I think that was yes ownership, so people who did own pets. When they asked for people who did own dogs, they were 60% correct. If I go look at that general population, that means they were, where I look at the index on the right, they did really well. In other words, it was far better than random. However, on the flip side, we looked at children in the household, we looked at race, and the match rates were 53% to 78%. They were right about 30% of the time on children in the household and about 70% of the time on race. Now, why is that important? 34% of the population is children in the household. So if all I did was say yes to everything that was served up there, I would be right 34% of the time. So we look at that and say we're about 88. That, you know, the partner in this case is about 88% below what it would be for random. You're better off not using the data at that point. And the same thing happened for race. And on the surface, it looks really good. You know, there was about a 70% correct rate, but 73% of the population in the U.S. self-identifies as being white. And so if all I did were say white for every data point, I would be right 73% of the time. So in other words, that index is less than 100, which means it's worse than random, right? And you know, so when we look at big data sets, the good news is they're great at a lot of things. The bad news is there's a lot of noise in them sometimes, and it's hard to troubleshoot that. And so that's what we did here. I'll go to one last case. So the other thing, and those first two things I spoke about were very much about looking at probability sample. But what surveys are good for is understanding the why behind things. And so you'll see Ashley actually do a live demonstration of this platform. But I actually went in and I created a segmentation on the fly about pet owners, 7 segments. And I took 3 of them out here as an example because I want to understand it's not just if someone owns or doesn't own a pet. The question is, what are they like? What motivates them? Why do they do what they do? And so interestingly here, and the numbers up top, I'll have to say in this one are a little bit off because I did it on people instead of households. So hopefully you ignore the exact, but the percentages should be about right. So about 12%, I named Convenience Kathy. You'll see why. They may not be the best names. 15% Activist Ann, and 14% Reaching Rachel. And so Convenience Kathy feels very alone in the world. Interestingly, and happy to be a dog person, so I guess I can say that I can say this, that, you know, this person's a cat person, right? They buy Friskas and Tidy Cats and Fancy Feast. On the far right side, Reaching Rachel clearly is a dog person. This person's buying Advantage for dogs and Pedigree and store brand dog biscuits, and they self-identify as an optimist. And this middle zone is interested in the arts and is apparently kind of an alcoholic because they really over-index for drinking alcohol. So in other words, these are the top index brands associated with each of these people. If we go one slide further, we take the same thing. We can look at their media habits, and Convenience Kathy is about Dr. Phil and Criminal Minds and Ellen and daytime television in a lot of cases, I'm guessing. On the far right-hand side, we got Hallmark Originals, Pioneer Women, Dish Network, right? And in that middle zone, you could see it's very digital. It's Reddit, New York Times, digital, BuzzFeed, IMDb, right? So again, you're starting to clearly understand very different segments that are pet owners that you might not have otherwise. And to take it one step further, if you go to the next slide, we start diving into their psychographic or attitudinal drivers, and that difference really starts popping out. So Convenience Kathy thinks that clothes sold at a discount store are just as good as a department store. They like used cars as well as new ones. They like simple, easy to prepare foods and treat themselves to foods that are not good. They're a TV addict. They prefer to buy cash for things they're buying. They think shopping in grocery stores is a bore. So you get a sense for them. That's why I put it Convenience Kathy. Reaching Rachel, a conservative dress style. Before buying a car, they want to know about the safety rating. They like religious programming. They also prefer to pay in cash. They enjoy shopping with their children. Conformity makes them feel uncomfortable, right? They look for organic and natural foods and look for methods of transportation that are friendly for the environment, right? So in other words, they care about the things they're going for. They're looking to do better in a lot of ways, and they're still very conservative in a lot of ways. So they're trying to reach reach out further. And then this activist Anne is completely different. They enjoy clothes shopping, driving faster than normal traffic. They think it's their duty to recycle. They drink alcoholic beverages at restaurants, think that marijuana should be legalized. They don't like the idea of being in debt. They avoid television commercials, right? So you can clearly see and they prefer environmental friendly products. You can clearly see that these people tend to be more digital, probably fall on the liberal side of the political spectrum. And so that's what I'm calling activist Annie here. So again, when I look at probability sample, it's great for calibrating, it's great for a truth set, and the survey aspects are really good at understanding why people do what they do. I'll leave you with one more thought on this, and I'll turn it over to Ashley to do the more interesting things. If you flip one forward, Scott. So as a company, we work with a lot of companies that have amazing data on their own, and I think that the question is, why would that be? And really, that's because when a company has very deep first-party data, a lot of the time, by the way, apologies for the sirens. This is in New York, and there are always sirens here. When companies have really deep first-party data, it tells them about their own customers, and where they need to understand is the rest of the market as well. So with all that said, I'm actually going to turn it over to Ashley. She's going to give an actual demonstration, and she'll take the perspective of a brand that is creating a set of personas or segments like the one you looked at, and drilling that down to a media strategy that can be actioned on a local and out-of-home perspective.
Thanks, Andrew. Again, my name is Ashley Brown. I'm a senior account manager here at Simmons Insights. So what you'll see on my screen is our Insights tool. There's a few different modules. We have our Essential Catalyst, which is where I'll be focused today, and then our Instant Edge factor as well. So I'm in our Brand Catalyst tool. Again, like Andrew said, I'm going to give you a real world example of how to kind of take our data and turn it into actionable insights. Brand Catalyst is our advanced brand strategy and predictive segmentation tool. It's really used for three really main reasons, which is exploring personas. You can assess your markets, either your own market, a certain persona, or a competitive market, as well as create quick segmentations of certain personas. So you can dig even deeper than just into one big group of people. So for purposes of this demonstration today, again, we do have a lot of rich out-of-home advertising data. I will be working that in, weaving it in as I go. But I'm going to start with a brand that we probably all know and maybe most of us love, which is Netflix. We know they do a lot of out-of-home advertising. I know myself, I see stuff for them all of the time. So when I put in Netflix, I'm going to look at the Netflix paid monthly consumer. And then really quickly, we're going to get something very similar to what you saw in the slides. We'll see here that 88 million adults over the age of 18 in the US are Netflix consumers. That's about a 36% reach into the total US population over age 18. Again, our benchmark here is the total US adult population over age 18. We can see our Netflix consumers consider themselves interested in the arts. They describe themselves as kind of awkward and forgetful. They have a pretty decent financial outlook. They are kind of, likely to be buying a medium or big ticket item in the near future. And they also have a high consumer confidence. From there, we get to keep going and we learn about their top 5 brands. Not surprisingly, the top 3 of them are going to be streaming devices, things like Apple TV, Google Chromecast, and Roku, as well as the top 5 media, which we can see they might not be the most brand loyal people because their top brand media is going to be competitors, Hulu No Commercials, Amazon Prime, BuzzFeed, etc. So from there, we've gotten a good, pretty high level overview of them, but we want to go into their motivations and their factors and the why, like Andrew referenced. I know when we're doing, you're doing media buying plan, it's really important to figure out where you can reach them, but also it's important to figure out why they're doing things so that we can reach them and motivate them in a way that speaks to them. They might see it, but if it doesn't speak to the messaging that reacts best for them, it might be off or not. So here we can go in and look through all of our attitudinal statements and see the Netflix consumer loves clothes. So they might be a shopper. They drive quickly. They're very environmentally friendly. They're looking at their diet and exercise, using apps to look at those. They might be a little bit more progressive, looking into marijuana legalization. They like trying new drinks. Again, something else to note here is product placement. They don't mind product placement in movies or in television. Not to say that they, always go by it, but they don't mind it. They like traveling, etc. So there's a lot we can learn and uncover about them here in our attitudinal section. Now that I've taken a look at all of that, we can go and look at their top brands. Up top, we looked at the top 5. Here we're looking at the top 10. Again, things like Apple TV, Netflix, LaCroix, which seems to be something everybody is into these days. We also have the opportunity to go here and drill down further. So maybe for brands, you want to look specifically at a certain set of brands. Just as for an example here, we could do fast food restaurants. I can go here and find all of their top 10 fast food restaurants. So we have Chipotle, Jimmy John's. Maybe this would be an opportunity to uncover some sort of brand partnership, or even maybe it will drive you to put your out-of-home advertisements close to these establishments because that's where your Netflix consumer might be and be able to find it more easily. We could do the same thing with media. Again, we pointed out here that, media is not going to be that brand loyal. They have people still looking at their main competitors, Hulu, Amazon, Spotify, Amazon Prime Music, Fandango, etc. If you want to go through here, you could also refine these down to maybe you want to look at just cable TV programs that they're watching. You can see what shows they're watching on regular broadband TV. So then maybe that would be some content that you could draw in and make them more engaged. Again, we have our demographics down here as well. It's just going to give you a basic demographic overview. So quickly, we've uncovered a lot of information about our Netflix consumer, but maybe we want to know about our competitors' consumer so we can get a good idea of the competitive landscape and maybe how to message towards taking some of our competitors' viewers. So I'm going to do Hulu no commercials. And then now we'll have a really good side-by-side of our Netflix consumer and our Hulu consumer. We'll see, the sizing is definitely very different. The reach for Hulu is much significantly lower than Netflix. They kind of differ when it comes to things they first pop. Netflix is more interested in art, while Hulu likes to stand out in the crowd, but we can see they both describe themselves as a little forgetful and careless. Again, similar financial outlooks as well as purchasing. We have our top 5 brands. These are still filtered for food because I did that on the other one. But if I remove that, it would go back up to our media ones as well. And then again, you can do a deep dive here into our attitudinals and see them on any scale of agreement. They both like shopping. One has more propensity for foreign cars than the other. They both seem to be environmentally conscious as well as health conscious and a little bit more liberal leaning when it comes to views on general attitudes. And then again, we can go down here. I'm going to clear this filter and compare their 2 top brands. So we can see a big difference here is the Netflix is they're focusing on Apple TV, Chromecast, and Roku, whereas Hulu consumers are more on PlayStation and Amazon and Xboxes. So now we know plenty about our personas for our consumer of Netflix and its competitor Hulu. So maybe we want to do a little bit deeper dive into this and see the best ways we can maybe reach them at out-of-home advertising, explore a little bit more about how they feel about certain topics. So with that, I'm going to go to our reporter module. When you go to the reporter module, you have access to our entire full database. Here, I'm going to go to this section we have called Advertising Outside the Home, where we're going to go ahead and ask them all sorts of ads that they've noticed in the past 30 days, 7 days, how much attention they paid to them. This is video specific. And then we also ask about non-video advertisements. So I'm going to just do large billboards. You can see here, this is going to give me, I have an immediate comparison of Netflix and Hulu. I'm going to rank this by our percentages. Give me just 1 second. And then here really quickly, we'll see that 38% of Netflix consumers paid a little bit of attention to a non-video billboard advertisement, whereas Hulu, 36% of them paid some attention, some none, some a lot. We can click through again. We have a variety of different ones. We have the bus, shelters, and benches, sports stadiums, and arenas. We also ask again about video ads. So we can see that right now for Netflix and Hulu, gas station ads that are video are popping up the most for them to be recognizing and paying the most attention to. So we do have a wide set of data, again, just of how they're paying attention to them or if they've even noticed them at all. So that's just the baseline for that. But we also have a wide variety of opinion statements when it comes to media. If you go into the media statements, you can, again, go and see everything side by side. So you get a really great, quick data visualization of how you can be putting these plans together and what pops for whoever you're working with. We ask questions like, do TV commercials make you laugh? Does all advertising annoy you? Do you notice ads in the lobby of movie theaters? We can see Hulu consumers are 49% more likely to, or 49% of them are looking at ads in the lobbies of movie theaters, how they feel about commercials, etc. So even if you're just trying to get an idea of what your end persona, how they feel about advertising, maybe the best way to reach them, this is another good tool we have to use. And then as far as out-of-home advertising goes, again, we also do cover those in quintiles and media volume groups, if that is something you're looking to do in your media planning. So now that we know all about our competitor, maybe we want to know more about our prospective consumers. So I'm going to take Hulu off here and then put in our Netflix prospect. The prospect is going to be somebody who isn't using the service right now, but is likely to use it based on a comparison we've done between our consumer and non-consumer. So what we can do here is, again, another quick comparison side by side. I won't walk you through this whole thing because I'm sure you get the gist of it by now. We've seen it a few times. But I'm going to take us to the creator portion. Again, I mentioned earlier that one use for this tool is going to be to segment your audience. And, you know, what are we thinking? Like, are all prospects the same? Can I turn my focus to just the whole group of Netflix prospects as a whole, or should I take a deeper dive into them and see if there's subsets of these prospects I can be focusing on in different ways? So I'm going to do my Netflix prospect. Once I do this, I can go ahead and segment. We do have some default settings, so you can make them either off of your own settings or our default. I'm going to go through our default. I'm going to do 3 of them today, and then that will give us 3 different prospects. You will see here we have pretty varying different levels of psychographics for them. Interested in international events, feel alone in the world, like to stand out in a crowd, etc. We can, again, do a brand, media, and then do a deep dive into their attitudinals as well. So what I'm going to do here is rename these. Again, like Andrew, I am not absolutely the best at naming these. So the first one looks like we have Worldly Wendy. And then we have Concerned Christine and Outgoing Olivia. I've already gone ahead and saved these. So once these save, you'll have access to them in the data, and you can take those, and then I can go back and learn a little bit more about my prospects. So now I have Worldly Wendy, Concerned Christine, and Outgoing Olivia. I can go over here to my reporter view, and then I will add those in. Bear with me as I add them all in. And then Outgoing Olivia. Okay, so now I have all 3 of my prospective Netflix consumers side by side. I can quickly, again, go through here in this entire data dictionary. I'll do the advertising outside of the home again, because I know that's something you guys are all interested in. And then we can see maybe where our different subsets of our prospects are accessing and seeing these, you know, advertisements that you might be putting out. So airports, doctors' offices, inside taxis, large department and retail stores, etc. So we can take this one step further by also looking at geographies. We have a wide variety of data on location. If you go into geographies, we can look all the way down to the census regions, Nielsen regions, as well as other geographies. We have state codes. So if you're wanting to look in a certain state only, we can actually rank this here. Maybe we want to focus mainly on Worldly Wendy. We can see, you know, where we're going to find her the most, which is going to be California, whereas Outgoing Olivia is a little bit less, so is Concerned Christine. So as you can see, we have a wide variety of data in here. Once you find your segments or your personas you're wanting to look at, you can use this tool for a full media planning endeavor. It can help you find out not just where to reach them, but how to reach them and what message will find them the best in which location and which method of out-of-home advertising. That concludes my portion. I am going to go ahead and hand it back over to Scott, and if we have any questions at the end, I will be happy to address them.
This is Andrew. I'm going to add one thing on there. Leave it there for a second.
Please do.
So I think this really illustrates the point at which that probability survey sample works really well and then peters out, because it's not a large sample. So we can look at these regions like, California, or we can go down to DMAs. Where this is where the partnership with GeoPath works really well, because those segments can now come over and be used to plan at a much more granular nature. So you figured out Worldly Wendy can be seen in maybe airports are a bad example because there are many of them in a different region, but I'll use them, right? And so then you can port those over and look at them in terms of a much more granular way of understanding inventory and buying locally. And with that, I'll turn it over because I think that's a good segue.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, a good segue. Let me just take ownership of the screen again here. Sorry. Jump back to our deck. Cool. So that begs the question, like, why is this important to GeoPath? And really, the whole goal of this today is really starting to try to help and show how the goal is really trying to understand our audience and who we're reaching. And we're super excited at GeoPath. If you've been joining any of our other webinars or just checking into the Insight Suite, just really excited about all the level of granular audiences that we're going to now have available to us and out of home, and how that's going to allow us to transact differently, how it's going to allow us to target audience very differently. And Dylan's going to talk more about kind of what that means and how we're accessing these various types of data in the Insight Suite, and how that's kind of coming out and allowing us to do these and have these capabilities in the Insight Suite.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, this is Determined Dylan. I am head of product here over at GeoPath, and very excited about how everyone is becoming more educated about data. It is something that powers so many of our decisions to make informed, smart decisions, but it's something that is somewhat mystifying at times. As you can see, it's as complex or as simple as you want to make it. And in the current state of marketing, things have gotten very complicated. And what we're trying to do here at GeoPath is to work with partners like Simmons to help make getting insights out of data easier for our members. And if you go back about 15 years ago, when we were known as the Traffic Audit Bureau for Media Measurement, I promise it's the last time I'll say that name, we used to use the U.S. Census and the American Community Survey, which is a very, very powerful, very comprehensive survey. And the census, of course, a census, actually asking every single person in the United States some very core attributes: age, gender, ethnicity, household income. And that was all part of what we were able to provide to our members as far as how we were talking about audiences. But things have changed, and the amazing insights of how we understand audiences now, not trying to generalize audiences, but really getting into the types of people, not just how to describe them, but what do they do, how do they feel, how do they think? And these are things that you can't necessarily just observe about people. You have to talk to them. You have to understand how they behave, and that's really, really exciting. And that's something that we're rolling out in our new Insight Suite as we overhaul our measurement, integrating with Claritas audience information, household information that ingests survey data, just like what Simmons does, to create a holistic view of the entire population for all out-of-home assets that GeoPath audits. Can you go to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
So currently in the Insight Suite, we have over 2,000 unique audiences that are available, and that list is expanding greatly. As you can see, we have lots of demographic, household information, some behavioral information, things that come from like that core census, household travel survey data sets. But the consumer profiles and the consumer behaviors are where things get really exciting. And it's really opening up the dialogue for out-of-home to have conversations that we haven't been able to have previously, because we can talk about the types of people and who and where we can best help our clients reach those individuals and understand a little bit more about who those individuals are. So lots of fun information in here, consumer information of how people spend money on automotive brands, where they go for automotive parts, how they vote, things that you're not necessarily going to observe from remotely. And then also some fun things about cross-media consumption, telecommunications, magazine, print, and then one that's incredibly deep and very interesting to get into is the psychographics. How do people think? What are their opinions? And then, of course, some core audience segmentations, which are very helpful when you're trying to think of how to think about the type of people and sort of generic terms of who you're looking for. And the psychographic ones is one that we'll focus on real quick because it ties into what Andrew was talking about earlier, which is about pets. So this is something that you've had in the past from GeoPath, but you can go into the Insight Suite today and identify whether or not the audience for a particular piece of inventory agrees that pets deserve to be pampered. And if you're a pet owner out there, I'm sure you agree. I'm sure the overlap of those two questions is quite high, that people feel that their pets deserve to be pampered. So lots of other interesting information about pet ownership, where you shop for pet supplies and whether or not you actually bought items in those locations for pet supplies. So in this case, on the internet, which many of us are spending lots of time and dollars on internet commerce. So,
sorry, Dylan. I was just going to jump in, and if any of you have joined any of the training sessions on the Insight Suite, you'll see how when you have access now to all these different types of audiences, so psychographic versus demographic, you'll see how when you choose an audience, it really impacts the inventory that is best for reaching that audience. And you can see when you can target more granularly that may show a completely different set of inventory that you would recommend to your clients or to an agency or whoever your constituency is. And it's really, I find it very interesting as I'm working through these scenarios, and it's just exciting to have access to all of these audiences for us. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of intuitive knowledge that our members have about their local marketplaces that is invaluable. And what's wonderful is when we see stories about the data backing up a lot of those local understandings of how people move around the local marketplace and reflecting the local patterns for every single piece of inventory. But then as well, all the things that they may have not known before, and not because they hadn't thought too much about it before, but yeah, of course, yeah, that neighborhood over indexes for this type of audience, and these are the roadways that they use. Now we have that data to back it up, which is wonderful.
Right. Cool.
So just wanted to get at the core of how we do what we do. It all starts, as Andrew said, with understanding the household and understanding how representative the data is that you have available to understand a certain dimension of that area. So working with our partners, with Simmons and with Claritas, we have a very good understanding of the types of people that live in a particular area. And so we know the age breakdowns, the family structure, we know how many vehicles per household people have, we know what jobs people have, we know what type of incomes they have, we know what type of disposable incomes they have, we know what travel patterns they have based upon the preferred method of transportation for commuting. We know lots of different dimensions about just the population in general, and that's incredibly important to understand the context of all of the other information that we get. So we get some information that helps us understand how people move throughout the day as they're away from their home. And so this trip information that we leverage helps us understand in vehicles and on foot, how do people travel around on the network of roadways or pathways at places of interest, at restaurants and bars and gyms and airports. How do people travel? How do they move? And how do they get from point A to point B? And that network's wonderful, but by itself it isn't much. We need to understand it in the context of the inventory that's on those roadways. So GeoPath has over 1 million audited inventory locations, about 500,000 pieces of roadside inventory, expanding all the time, absolute tons in transit environments. Play-based is going to be rolling out soon. We're also working on fleet-based rolling media that is just going to expand that footprint of all of the out-of-home media that we understand the audiences for. And all of that is put together in this syndicated resource for our members that's standardized, that's audited, that's available in our Insight suite or through APIs to integrate with first-party platforms or even third-party platforms. There's a lot of tools that are being developed out there that are leveraging data that is just really exciting to see what people are doing with it, how they're deriving insights and answering questions for all of our members. So lots of fun stuff there. But the core of it is that all of this information, all of these various data points, not all of them are perfect. There is no silver bullet. There is no one data set that can answer all questions, but it's when you put all these pieces together, put one in the context of one another, you understand where the audited inventory is, you understand how it's illuminated, where it's oriented, what roadways it can be seen from, and the people that are traveling on those roadways, why they're traveling, where they're coming from, how fast they're traveling, what the makeup of those households are. All of that comes together to help GeoPath create this holistic measurement for all out-of-home advertising in the outdoor space, and that's really something that I just cannot drive home enough. That it's the combining and leveraging of panel data, of location data from mobile devices. All this information comes together to help answer this: how many people were exposed to my out-of-home asset? What was their makeup? Where did they come from? And how often did I reach them? How did that fit together? So all of those metrics are coming together for out of home, and it can't be done with one data set. It's really how all of this information is being put together. So it's been a lot of fun putting this out there in the marketplace, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from our lovely members that have been evaluating our Insight suite and the tools. And yeah, so if there's any questions, be happy to answer them.
Cool. Yes, great segue. And as members are typing questions in, I do have one question. Maybe I'll throw it to Andrew first, and maybe if Dylan, you have anything you want to add to it. But as our members are, we talked earlier on, like there's a lot of different sources. Are there rules of thumb they should have in their back pocket or think about as they're trying to judge or observe a piece of data of whether or data source that they should think about as they're analyzing it or looking at it?
I'll give just two rules of thumb. One, get your bias out of it yourself, right? So I think some people that ability sample and some that believe in big behavioral data sets, and like you said, they're all good for some things and not good for other things. And it's not about the story we tell ourselves, it's about what we can actually do with the data, right? So I think you got to get your own bias out of it. The second thing is find some way to test it, right? So, when people ask me, they say, for the doubters, they say, well, your data is not great. It's only survey, it's self-reported, and it's small data. And I say, well, I know that my data is good. How do I know? Because we work with all these companies that have first-party data. And when I go into them and say, here's the number of clients or customers we think that you have that do X, Y, Z. And if I'm not anywhere close to the numbers they have, then I got bad data. And if I'm pretty much close to it consistently, then it's pretty good data, right? So I'd say find whatever your way is, find some way to test it. And there's probably more advanced ways than what I'm saying, but find a way to test it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Check it against something that you know, and something that you know, not something that you believe. Something that you know. I think that's another eye-opening experience that people get when they start getting into new sources of data, is that it oftentimes challenges what they may believe to be the truth in the marketplace. The other thing I would highly recommend people do with any data set, and we do this with every single piece of information that we bring in, is understand two things about a data set. One, why was it collected in the first place? A lot of times data that is being used is not being used for its original purpose. For example, we use a lot of connected car data. It's fantastic information, but most collected car data wasn't meant to answer advertising's questions. It was meant to provide speed information for congestion, for understanding how long it would take to get from point A to point B to replace the Chopper Dan of the world. And so that dimension's perfect for that data, but some of the other bits of information, it may not be the perfect purpose of what that data was intended to do or why it was gathered in the first place. And then the other part of it is understand how it was collected. Where did it truly come from? The nature and the bias, perhaps, of the device or the mechanism with which it was collected or where it was collected.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions, Brian, that are coming up? Well, we are coming to the top of the hour, and one, I want to say thank you to Andrew and to Dylan and to Ashley for being on this session today and helping provide some context to all the data that's out there, and especially in how it's kind of being drawn into the Insight Suite itself. There's still time if you do have a question and are thinking one, typing one in, please do that. I do want to talk about some other upcoming webinars that we have. The next set of our training sessions, our monthly training sessions, are going to be Thursday and Friday, the 21st and 2nd of this month. As always, we'll talk about the changes to the Insight Suite and try to give you some context on how to use them right now to create value for your clients. And then our next in our series of data talks is going to be with Kelly Flynn and Horst Stipp from the ARF, talking about some research that they've recently conducted on the incremental use of platforms, so how adding out of home to a media plan helps increase amplification of that media plan. But if there are no other questions, and it looks like there aren't any, again, just want to say thank you again to everybody. Appreciate everybody joining. If you do have a question post-webinar, reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org, and we'll do our best to get you an answer to that. But otherwise, again, just thank you, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.